So by now, I have finished my entire project. So what I thought I'd do is I'd go over each different aspect of my programming side of things, so I can explain how they work or how I've made them. So this video will be about the player and his different menu mechanics that apply to him. So first things first is the main player movement script. So if we go access this now and I change the window to the Visual Studio's version of it, we can go ahead and see the script that I have for the player. Now in here we have the player movement script. A lot of these things have been blanked out because of how this was the script used in my prototype for most of the player's movement in general. I decided for this project though that I'd separate some parts because it allows me to easily work on them, and it also allows me to disable aspects whenever they need to be disabled, of course. So the first things to note is in how in this player movement script we have the jump mechanic, the hiding mechanic, and I believe that is all we have on this one. Yes, the jump and hide mechanic. Now, if we go back up to the top, as you can see here, these are the different type of variables that will be shown in the Unity editor. A lot of these aspects can get removed, which I probably will do whenever it comes to showing you the finished version of things. But as it is right now, this is what's been shown, and different aspects like bools are used for whenever I want to get animations complete or certain tasks done. Like, for example, if you're going to go jump, it'd have to set a bool so that other parts can be disabled or parts can't be active. Of course, connecting towards a rigid body just so I can actually create momentum and lift the player, of course. And things like linking game objects are used towards uh, disabling scripts or in general the object. Uh, and then these final two here are towards the timer mechanic and the E key mechanic. Actually, wait, this is not for the timer, this is just for the E key. What this does is it collects the image from the canvas, that is the E key, as why if it's a public, in my Unity editor, I can select which uh, image variable is representing the E key, of course. And then the sprite render is, of course, used for for the player. Now, if we go down towards the start, we have here that I want to make sure that a lot of bools are set to false or true, and that certain game objects like the E key text is disabled. And then, of course, the renderer is to get the component from the main player itself. Now, in here, in the main update, is where most of my scripts are. Of course, I can just get rid of most of these things now because they're not important. So as we see here, um, what this is the jump aspect of this entire bar here. Is whenever you go ahead and press down on the jump key, these extra parts here are towards making sure that, for example, if jump is enabled so that you can jump, this whole script can happen. Make sure that you are grounded and stuff like these that is crawling and is running. They were used in the project, but I will explain a bit further ahead when I show that script why it should technically be removed at this point. Um, anyway, if we go onto here, of course, so what happens is once you've done the script, it will go ahead and make sure these parts get done. And of course, if you can jump, essentially, what it will do is it will start a timer, which the timer itself is 1 in general. So what it does is it ensures that if as long as your timer is above 0, then it will start lowering down the timer. And then that's for that aspect. But also, if you can jump, it will set your speed to 0. This will prevent the box from being able to move when he is charging his jump. It's a main mechanic that I want done from a game because I find it to be more of a interesting mechanic to have him charge up his jumps rather than just being a traditional platformer. And of course, the ball here that links to the animator will go ahead and it will set the is jumping variable to true, which would then start off the jump beginning animation and then lock on that. And of course, this else is about if you can't jump in general, then it will just make sure that your jump enabled is false, preventing this script from even happening. Going forth, this is all about the different jump times that will change the jump force of the player. If you release in any of in between these times, it will change the jump force, allowing the player to, of course, go in different heights. This has been a trouble time balancing because during the demo, I only had 3 different times for different heights, and even then, with how things were, it wasn't entirely accurate, and there were occasional issues. I believe for this project, I have fixed most of it. There's a slim chance of this problem where the jump height doesn't accurately jump. There's a slim chance of that kind of still existing. Besides that, I believe the problem is the animation aspect that could be causing it, but that is not important. But what is important is, of course, here. So once you've released the jump key and make sure that you are grounded still and jump enabled is on, it will go ahead and if you can jump, as long as you can, this debug is only for me. It won't matter for any of you, anyone else playing the game. They won't be able to see any debugs. But what happens is it goes ahead and disables the is grounded, so that of course you can't repeat the script, and then it changes the velocity based on the jump force, and resets the controller speed to normal. We have here. This was once a thing planned so that when you jump, you get an extra boost in speed so you can go further, and it starts this waiting coroutine, which is here, which resets the speed back to normal. But what I've done is, because of the movement speeds that I had before, it kind of messed around with this and it stopped it from working. And then when I paused that part, I decided to keep this removed because it didn't feel right. And so what I did was, with the waiting script, is I've repurposed it for something else. Anyway, so if we remove this is not important, and neither of these. So what happens is when you release the spacebar, it sets the ball end jump to true, which allows him to do the final push-up animation that is used in the game. And then of course it resets the jump time counter to 1 so that you can redo the script, and then starts waiting. Of course, the same aspect here is that if you can't jump enabled is false, so you can't do this part. And as I've already explained, this has been a repurposed waiting aspect, except that what happens here is that after a frame, after this jump time counter is reset, what it'll do is it will do this waiting for 0.01 seconds and instantly refresh the bools to false, preventing the player, of course, to redo the animations instantly or just keep it in a loop. Going back, we have here is the hiding. So with the hiding script, we have different variables, of course, if you can hide, and then, of course, things like if you press down E. Now, these two parts here, they are on regards to the graphics element of the hiding mechanic. Now, what the first one does, it changes the color of the sprites to being what I select, and what I've selected is a slightly more grayed out version. That allows the design to seem like he's more in the shadows, which adds towards the hiding elements. And the sorting order, what this basically does is, because how in game, I've explained in my final evaluation of the project, but in the game, the monitors and the player are in different orders. This allows, of course, the player to travel behind the monitor or ahead of it. So, as seen here, when you hold down E in any of these hideable spots, it changes the order to 0, which puts him behind the monitor. And back over here, it changes it back to Y and sets it more forward again. Ignoring this is the aspect of the bool, which allows is hiding to be true and preventing the jump from happening, of course. Now, these parts here, this prevents the police officer's collisions from detecting the player. Now, I will show in this here. This is linked towards the police officer. Now, what this does is it has two game objects linking towards the player and a spawn point empty that I have placed somewhere in the map, more likely in the beginning. And what this does is if the player or the tag to hide gets linked into the collisions, then what it does is it changes the player's position to where the spawn point is. Now, the reason why it's not set to the player and instead to the hide is because if I move on to the game, I can showcase this. In the game, we have here the hide and how the left and right collisions have the scripts themselves instead of the main officer itself. So if I click on here, we see here that it's got the play the text script, links towards the spawn point, which spawn point is back to where the box is. And the hide is the to hide while the player has its own tag. The reason why this part is separate is, of course, because when you press down E, what is supposed to happen is it will disable this trigger collision, mainly the game object itself, preventing you from getting caught and teleporting, of course. Now, if I had more time learning about Unity and all that again, I will probably find some new way of changing it, but for now, this is perfect for what I want. So there's no need to actually change anything. Anyway, going again, if we move back to there we go. So going back to the player movement, once again here, a debug is just for me to know if any of these parts are working. And then here is what I mentioned before. The hiding box is that hide game object that was shown. And then, of course, changes your speed to 0 so you cannot move. And then the else is basically just the other way around, creating speed, allowing you to be able to jump and different parts like that. Now, of course, as seen here, I did have a whole part where if you can hide. Now, what is shown here is if the player comes into collision with anything with a tag of hide box, that doing it in the base of a tag once again allows me to create different objects just to have the same tag, which allows these things to happen. So if the player does collect with that, then what it does is it enables the E key text that we saw before, and the can hide. It will be enabled. And then if you leave the place, of course, you see from there, it does that. So if I save this and I move on to the next one. So back to the Boxman, and we go to the Boxbot code. Now, this one is about the player movement. Now, what you'll see is a lot of parts have been disabled, and that is because this was used for his sprinting, crawling, and just general jumping. But there were a lot of problems later on that caused this script to kind of mess up. Meaning, what I had to do was I had to disable the script for now. Of course, it is not an important script in general. It's only as a bonus for me. The player speed is already good enough to reach around the entire level, and there won't be any issues reaching gaps that's part of jumping. But, of course, it's a shame that these were disabled, because this would have been a fun little mechanic to add. And, of course, the anything else towards this is just to make sure that your player starts with the regular speed, and that it links towards your bools and rigid bodies. This part in the fixed update, as seen here, is that it, instead of it being just a normal update, it's every fixed update, so that it's always at a specific time of when it updates, and then it would link towards the whole movement script. Now, one thing I had learned was that during the beginning of the project, you may have seen in one of my evaluations that the player would move without moving. And it was not a big issue for me to solve at the point, but I felt in my free time that I would try and solve it. So what I tried doing was I tried tinkering around, seeing what the problem was, and I discovered that if I set it into a fixed update, for some reason that would slow it down enough so it's not important. Now, what I think is happening is there's something in this script here that is still kind of moving the player just slightly. Because, as I mentioned before, if you had it in a normal update, it would update every single frame. So it constantly like that. Meaning that if it's doing that sort of amount of updates, then you'd be more obvious on when the player is moving that way. Rather than it being in a fixed update where it's going more slower, so that it's more slowly movement. This is a problem that I've kind of delayed a bit, of course, as I've explained just now. But it's a problem that I would love to try and fix for when I want to make this an actual game in the future. After this is about the main movement, of course, this aspect here. Now, what this does, it changes the player's rotation, so it kind of flips it depending on which movement you go. If your movement input is high, meaning you're going to the right side, then your transformations will not change. But if you're moving the opposite direction, it would decrease the move input. So what, of course, that would mean is the Euler angle would flip. Now, the reason why I haven't done the generic flip bracket is because, as explained in the tutorials I've watched, what it does is it tends to not work with animations pretty well. So let's say if I have my whole many different animations to link towards it, and I just use the flip, then it could flip one part, but then other animations may glitch and it could just move the player going looking that way, to go in like that constantly. Now, what of course this one does, it just changes it so that everything about the player game object in general is flipped. Before, not too long ago, this caused a problem with the E key. So what I discovered I'd do is for the E key, I'd place it in my player movement script and have it work here as a um, separate game object instead of it being linked towards the player. And that works how it is in the game. Of course, I've already explained this part, and this part's not important, so that is all for that. Next is the win. Now, as is shown here, we have, of course, more variables linking towards things like the police officer, tools, just the animators in general for different things like the vent, and aspects like the camera. Well, most of these here is a bonus. Now, the main part that's important is mainly this, and these two. So when, of course, the player links in towards the game object named vent, what will happen is it will enable the exit is true and enable the key text that we saw before. So of course, if like if exit is true and you press E, then what it does is it will mainly do the start coroutine winning, which is as seen here. Waits a second to load the winning scene. Now everything else is a bonus where, as mentioned before, the police officer is linked because what happens is the event will do an animation as shown, as mentioned there. And because of that, and because of how you have to wait a second before loading the scene, I want to disable the police officer in case he decides to turn around and connect with the player, of course. Now, I could have just gone ahead and tried just instead of disabling the police officer, I would disable the left and right aspects of it. But that would mean extra code, so I didn't want to bother with that, and this is just an easy approach. Now, to fix the problem, where, of course, now that would mean that it would the police officer would easily just disappear once you escape. So what I've done is I've added the pixel cam and the zoom cam. Now, of course, as you see here, the cam's linked towards the main camera, and the other cam links towards the. I had realized I haven't been showing the Visual Studio just yet, but so the vent, of course, linked towards the vent. The police officer links towards the police officer. The camera links towards the main camera, and then the zoom links towards the zoom camera. And then these parts are for the stopwatch, because the stopwatch has its own script, which I'll explain. And then this is links towards the E key, and then of course the main camera in general and the speed. So going back to the actual script, if I just show it. So I'll just quickly scroll because I noticed that you missed it. And of course, here, this is a late update because what it is supposed to do is whenever a specific aspect is done, this will be a delayed response, of course. Now, of course, whenever the zoom active gets enabled from when you press E, what will happen is, of course, the pixel camera, which is the main camera, will disable, and it will enable, and it will switch the camera to being the zoom camera. And from there, that allows the camera to zoom in. So if I go ahead and I'll just show you on Unity, if I unmaximize this, and I move the Boxman over to place and press E, you saw there that the camera zooms in. And that is how that works. So anyway, that should be it to mention about the player. Of course, there are a couple things that I could link. The stopwatch. The stopwatch will probably be the final thing I'll mention in this video, because this video is a very long video in general, and I know how long videos tends to not load correctly onto YouTube. But anyway, so the timer script links towards a specific variable that is called the score UI, and it will go ahead and make sure there's a float for time and the bools for is running. Now, as you can see here, when you start the script in general, it will make sure that the score UI links towards the component that is a text variable, and then this don't destroy on load will go ahead and ensure that this timer class will not get destroyed. Or in general, it will prevent the stopwatch game object from getting destroyed. Now, of course, when you have a void star, once the application is loaded with the level 1, it will make sure that the time is 0. Now, instead of it just being time 0 whenever you start, is because if the don't destroy on load is here, once you load a different scene, it will reset time to 0 in general. Now, if I add this part, it will of course prevent that from happening only if you enter the level 1 section of the game. Of course, then there's the timer stop that basically stops the timer from running, so that it can actually show you how long you took to beat the level at the end of the game. And then, of course, the timer start is allowing it to run. So in here we have the void update of is running, and what this of course does is it will increase the timer, which is of course 0, as seen there. And then what it does is, as if you load the application of win, what it does is it enables the timer stop. And then of course it will change the UI, score UI.text, that is the blank. If I go onto the Unity and go on that scene, is this blank variable here. Now if I go on it, and here we are. So this blank aspect is of course towards the script of is timer, so it links towards this. And of course then what it will do is it will change this text to being what is shown in the script you took, and then time seconds to beat the demo. Once again, I have also added this part here so that if you load the level, then it will still make sure that the timer is going up, because if in general it's this, it won't work fully. But that should be all I can say for the player. Is there anything else I can note down about the player's mechanics? There could be one thing, is that this what is ground section from the jump part is linked towards a layer that is ground. Now, of course, I've added the layer so that it can be like that, and what this basically means is that it will only detect what is ground based on what is got the layer of ground. So let's say if I go on the office level in general, you can see here that nothing in this has it, except if you go on the jumping area, which is only these specific spots on the level. And that has the ground part, so it allows the player to, of course, jump on these areas. for things like the shelves, they have their own aspects in here. They have the scripts working there, and they have grounds so that they actually still work in general. So the final thing I can do is actually just show you the player aspects of the game in maximized window, of course. So as we can see, of course, with the player, his is walking, his neutral animation, whenever he moves, he does his walking animation. Whenever you hold down the spacebar to jump, he'll start the animation, and when you release, he will release and do a different heights based on how long you've held for, of course. And the camera. I'll mention the camera in another video because that of itself is an annoying aspect, so I won't be bothered using that. But anyway, as long as the police officer turns the other way, we can go ahead and see the E key working, and when you press E, it moves the player, which hides him and prevents the police officer from seeing him, of course. So whenever this goes away, we can now go to the books and show the same thing, allows that to happen. And then we'll showcase the win as soon as this works. Press E, boom, loads this, and then there you go. Now it's updated that I took 60 seconds to beat the demo. So there's that. Now, of course, the final thing is the animator. There's not much I could show here besides this. This is a more pyramid idea, easily for me to understand. May not be easy for you to understand, but it's simple for me to. So let's, for example, go click play. You can see here now that what happens is it loads the idle animation, and if like the player moves, then the speed will go up or down, and it would make sure that these parts work. And then of course is if jumping would enable and allow this to happen, and when release, this will enable and then go back to disabling them to allow these parts to work. Now the only problem that's happening with the player is that whenever you quickly spam the spacebar, what happens is the waiting aspect doesn't happen in quick enough for the variable to change, because it will go ahead and instantly disable the end jump, of course, and will not re-enable it. So let's, for example, double spam. So as you can see here, we are locked in the end jump. But what is happening is that the jump is still counting down. So it's a weird issue that I'm trying to figure out, but as it is right now, it's not important because nobody really will be instantly spamming the jump bar, like as is shown. Because even then, if you do it slightly later, then it does still work. But if you do it too quick, while the end animation is running, it won't work. Anyway, that will actually be the end of this video. And there's still a lot more to note down in other videos, as I will explain in other videos the police officer, the camera now, and the UI. That should be the 3 last videos I should do, and I apologize if this video is long. I may over-explain a lot of things, but that is because I'm trying to explain how I did these things and how I solved most of my problems. So that should be all for this video, and I'll see you next time when I explain another different mechanic.